Welcome to the Truth Has No Sides podcast. These conversations will be had to expand the minds and the consciousness of you, the listener. If you like the content of the show, please like the video and subscribe to our channel to help this message be seen and heard by more people. Thank you for being here and enjoy the episode. All right, two red dots. We're recording. Today's guest, fortunately, from my soccer team, again, I think 80% of the guests come from guys I know on soccer. This is Igor Lemansky. He is a very good friend of a buddy I play soccer with. And luckily, there's a lot of guys on the soccer team, so they just keep feeding me amazing people. So I'll keep having them. Igor, I am not a big fan of bios, but I like the guests to just kind of let the world know who they are, what they're about, and then you and I will go off on a tangent for about an hour.
Yeah, it's great to meet you in person, Charlie. I know that, like you said, we have a mutual friend, Dan, who's also a great soccer player, and he's been a friend of mine for a while, and so anyone who's a friend of his, I consider a friend. So it's great to meet you, and I appreciate what you're trying to do on your podcast.
Yeah, thank you, man. Thank you.
Yeah. So about me, is there are you looking for like just a general bio? You're looking for me to just start talking randomly about
whatever the hell you want, man. Just talk about random stuff. You're from Utah. I think you're doing a bunch of meditation. You're doing a lot of stuff with the community right now. Yep. What show were you on as well? There was a Naked and Afraid or something like that.
No, it was the one with all the clothes on. So I was on a lot.
Oh, so you were clothed. Okay, that's unfortunate. Okay, gotcha. All right.
I always
just go from there.
Yeah. So I did grow up in Utah. And yeah, what to say about that? Yeah, I moved here when I was in 5th grade. So pretty much spent most of my kind of formative years here. And got really involved in community and politics right out of college. So I went to the University of Utah, and I was studying poetry and writing. I think as a maladjusted young kid, poetry was always the best way to try and express, just angst and longing. And, grew up with a single mom. My dad died when I was really young, and grew up in Utah, which is a pretty homogenous place for a tall guy who was the son of immigrants named Igor. And so didn't really feel like I had, much of a place. I had my really good friends. I had punk rock music, which was, the music of people who felt disenfranchised. And grew up here in Utah, loved the punk scene, loved my friends. Went to college, studied writing and poetry. Used to put on a poetry event called The Ruckus, where a bunch of poets would read while a band was playing and an artist was painting or sculpting, depending on what they're doing. So arts was really kind of my into community at first. And then music. Like, I can't say enough about how punk rock changed my life. Like, not only, growing up without a dad, growing up without brothers, having that opportunity to just be a big dude who could, swing some arm and get pushed down by other dudes and picked back up. That was just a huge place for growth for me personally. And then also, I'm really going all over the place with this, so this is all
that's
right.
That's what a podcast is for. This is not scripted, so continue. Well, one quick question.
Yeah.
Punk rock. Did you have long hair?
I had really curly hair. So my hair was much curlier when I was a kid.
So you're like mine. So we don't go long, we go out. I got you.
Yeah, we go out, and then I color it different colors and have different mohawks and tri-hawks and all of that stuff.
Understood.
But I feel like, say that again.
Understood. Continue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I feel like music, particularly concerts, was like my first real introduction to meditation. Was a collective group of people all putting their attention on one thing. And there's this, there's a lot of moments when you're at a concert and you really feel that collective, coherent, unitive consciousness.
Yes.
And
Yes.
everyone is listening to the same note, everyone is singing the same person singing, everyone is feeling, particularly if you're in a mosh pit, everyone's like feeling the movement of people as they're paying attention to it. And so there's this level of coherence, and there's this level of participation and emptiness that happens in music. And I certainly wouldn't have described it like that at the time when I was in it, but in retrospect, it was a really formative part of my life and a really important initiation into consciousness. And so I was in college studying poetry, and then got really inspired by Barack Obama. He was, he also was tall and had a funny name, and he had multicultural parents, and he represented for me someone who was thoughtful and trying to take perspectives, and someone who was intentionally trying to create a narrative of inclusion. And so, growing up with two parents, my mom was a refugee from Egypt, my dad was an immigrant from France. I just grew up with this thought that my immigrant story made me not a part of the American story. That there was something about not being born here. I was born here, but something about my parents not being born here that excluded me from the American story. And what I appreciated was Barack Obama was actually reshaping that narrative and saying, like, no, your immigrant story is actually a fundamental part of the American experience. And so I became really engaged in his 2008 campaign, ended up working in Colorado, and then coming back in, and I left, moved to France for a few years, and then came back as the state director of Utah here for the 2012 campaign. Stayed engaged in politics, but more than politics, stayed really engaged in community organizing. So how do you bring communities together? How do you tell stories and build skills in a way that help people see each other's perspective? And so that's been my work for a while, and a lot of adventures in the outdoors, because I feel like our relationship with the outdoors is our primary template for our relationship to each other. And a lot of meditation work, because I feel like that's where we actually build the skills of our interior. Like, how do we work with ourselves? How do we work with ourselves when we're triggered by others? And more importantly, how do you just be empty? Right? How do you be aware of how do I become aware of how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, but also how the light is around me, how other people are feeling, thinking, and not have my center of attention just solely on my own experience, but actually allow it to mix with space around me and find some happiness.
All right. So we've got, I'd like to learn more about the world travels, your time with the campaign. But my first question is, just for the listeners, will you describe, because in the moment, you didn't know it felt, you weren't thinking of meditation or consciousness, or the one word you used was emptiness, right? You're in a mosh pit. There's energy. You're feeling it. You're throwing your arms around. You're getting pushed down. You're getting picked back up. No one probably would think of that as emptiness, but now you do. Explain to the listeners what your description of emptiness is, why it's important. Just talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Zen and the Art of Mosh Pitting.
There's your book title. Your book title. You want to hang up and just start right now?
We'll be right back. I'm just going to write a quick book. I'm going to tell ChatGPT that title and see what it
You got it. That's perfect. Non-human. Perfect.
Yeah. So there's like a collective center of gravity of people's attention when they're in a mosh pit, which is the music. And they are I was experiencing a level of coherency, right? So we're all there for the same reason. We're all attuned to the same music, and we're all attuned to each other. And we're also attuned to ourselves. I think for people who have experience in meditation, particularly like Buddhist forms of meditation, I think people can think that there is no self in experience. Like there is no ego in experience. And, my experience and my training is that there's me and there's everything else. And I'm not weighing my experience of myself as being the primary thing I'm paying attention to. Like it comes up, right? Like thoughts about like, oh shit, I'm gonna get punched in the face, right? Or I should duck, or I should, weave a little this way because this guy's got giant spikes on his elbow and that's gonna hurt, right? So it comes up and then it goes in the same way that like you can hear a car, come by, whiz by, and then disappear. And so the experience of the self is there, but it's not the only thing that I'm attached to. And I think in a really good mosh pit with people who are attentive and expressive, there is that arising and falling of self, of a group, of music, and there's just a pure participation in what's happening. And there's a certain magic to that, and I would absolutely describe that as empty because it doesn't have a fixed nature. Mm-hmm. Right? We're not counting on it being exactly the same every time. We're actually really paying attention to the fact that it is a constant flow that we're engaged in. It's a constant flow in a circle. We're moving, music is moving. And so, the idea of a flow state, the idea of emptiness, they're really tied to one another, where we can let go of that fixed idea of a self or a situation and give ourselves to the movement of it. And particularly when it's a song, it's movements that you've done before. And so there's a little bit of muscle memory. I remember my first mosh pit I went to was my first concert. I was 15 years old. And it was when Rage Against the Machine came to Fork. Did you grow up here?
Yes. Yeah, I was. How old are you?
I'm 43.
Okay, so I'm 44. So that was the time when, before the canyons, remember it was Wolf Mountain and they'd have those big concerts up on the hill? Like 311 and those guys would come, Rage would come, all of those concerts on the hill. And it was probably you and your psychotic friends of me looking back saying, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, because there was always mosh pits, there was always fights, and then everyone would go to the 7-Eleven on Main Street and get nachos and hug each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was just experiencing, I'm like, how is this happening? How you just beat the shit out of each other, and like, this isn't crazy.
Yeah, there's a full range of humanity on display, and it's an interesting story around like Rage getting booked and then Spanish Fork realizing their music and then trying to shut them down, but they couldn't. And and I remember like outside there are like people with signs like Rage is gonna like take your kid's soul or whatever they thought was gonna happen, and they actually like boarded up the windows, like because they thought, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but I remember like going to the concert and like being really apprehensive and like, okay, I don't want to get too close because I don't want to be in the mosh pit, but I want to be able to participate a little. And I think they opened up with Bulls on Parade, and like there wasn't any place that wasn't a mosh pit.
Yeah, I was going to say it just started immediately.
Yeah, I was just thrown into it. And, obviously at that point I was just like scared and didn't know what was going on. It was like my first big concert, my first mosh pit. But, there's just something about that energy, that participation, that love for the same thing, that creates that sense of belonging and safety, which is, which is just pivotal for anything.
Wow. Well, we've already got a subject line and a title for this one: Mosh Pit into Enlightenment. That's what I love about these podcasts and these different guests, because this is, we're going to go straight from a 15-year-old 6'5" guy beating the hell out of people in a mosh pit to now I go outside next to a river and teach people meditation. So that's truth has no sides, right? That is the human experience. That's what we came here to do. There's experiences. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So was there a hospital involved in that first concert afterwards, or did you?
No. I mean, I was never trying to, beat people up, more than you just get beat up in a mosh pit, right? And I feel like folks really react to like your level of aggression and meet you with it. And
Sure.
so it's also a good calibration of like,
Mm,
how much do I want to give and how much do I want to get? Because it's like
mm,
it's an immediate back and forth.
mhm.
Uh, and so yeah, I mean, it was just a really incredible experience. I mean, Rage is such an incredible band, and it's crazy how their music is even more relevant now. And
Yes,
I mean,
they
just
were
as
ahead of their
relevant
time.
as it was back then, which is certainly commentary on maybe our inability to grow as a society and pay attention to some of the ills of society that are really still haunting us.
Yeah,
But
they.
yeah, I mean, it was certainly my first entrance into live music and into, I don't think I'd consider Rage music, but it was really expressive and, has its root in social commentary, which I feel is the heart of
Well, Rage back then, there wasn't as much access to information. The collective consciousness wasn't where it is right now. So their relevance today is even more so because more people are raising up and better understanding that message. And that message has a harder time being suppressed. And the
it.
people who try to suppress it don't have the ability to do that anymore. So their
Yeah.
lyrics is amazing. And I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought that up because I'm gonna, this podcast is over, I'm gonna go listen to that album. I love that album.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, it's interesting. Truth has no sides. And what you're saying about it's harder to suppress truth today. And at the same time, it's easier to create really narcissistic variations of truth. And so everybody
Yeah.
has their opportunity to basically create their world and share it
Mhm.
with other
Mhm.
people. And
Yeah.
the question about, what is capital T truth in a world that we're able to, you know, create such worlds of our experience and share them with people. I think it's a really essential question. I mean, I feel like so much of what's happening now is a little bit of the nihilism and narcissism that happens in the world that we're in right now, where we can't find a capital T truth. We can't agree that this is true. We're all just so locked into our own perspective that, you know, it's the downside of postmodernism. It's the downside of the world we're living in. That like everybody is, well, my truth is as important as your truth, and
Hmm.
really destabilizing, right? And there's a truth to that, right? That your first person experience is your first person experience, and it's 100% true for you, but it's also really partial. And I think people
Hmm.
miss that second, where, yes, this is an
Hmm.
experience, and there's a collective experience of everyone
Hmm.
who's feeling that their first person perspective is absolutely true, and
Yep.
there's a collective perspective. And so, you know, I think it's really interesting that we live in this world where, you we're all able to create our own Instagrams and TikToks and just create such a vivid world of our own experience that people are pulled into it.
Well, that is the duality of being a human, right?
Yeah.
Everyone talks about how now, like we spoke about, it's hard to suppress truth, but now there's more truths than ever, individual truths. So everyone says, well, we have access to all of these people, all of these teachings, all of these information, all of this knowledge. But when you have a couple and now you've got millions, people just stay stagnant because you're just going to go off in a million different directions. And someone comes up and feels in their bones, they feel in their heart that they need to speak a message and they need to let the world know. And it's just slightly off from the other guy. And then there's a million new people every day on YouTube saying, this is how you manifest. This is what consciousness is. This is what truth is. This is what this is. This is what God is. It's not God, it's universe. That's incredibly incredibly confusing to those who are now being tipped over the fence because of consciousness, to start wanting to understand consciousness, wanting to understand meditation, wanting to understand their true selves, because there's a million different perspectives. And I I know people are always talking about how this is such an age of enlightenment, an age of knowledge, but it's confusing as shit.
For sure. For
It
sure.
is
And
incredibly confusing.
I also feel like the addition uh, of psychedelics has been a real challenge for a lot of people, right? They're having
Hmm.
these incredible state shifting experience of of consciousness and no real framework to deal with it. And that's not to say, like, there's a lot of people who uh, have found their own way through personal experiences and experiments. And it's not to say that there's a specific way to work with it, but there's a reason that so many of the kind of esoteric teachings and experiences take place after someone's been, someone has a really clear base of morality, of philosophy around how to see the world. And
Hmm.
so when their ego gets completely destabilized, they actually have a framework for it. They actually have an intention around it. And that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen with kind of these experiments in consciousness that might not have a clear grounding. And so I do think it becomes a really confusing time right now.
Yeah, that's a big thing. That's one thing that my teacher always hammered home with me. An altered state of consciousness versus a permanent state of consciousness. Meditation gives you a permanent state of consciousness and a shift. It's gradual. It gives you the understanding. Uh, you got someone who's in second grade and then all of a sudden shoots up to college in
Yeah,
a 2 hour experience with ayahuasca. That's incredibly destabilizing. You take an 8-year-old and put him in college. Everyone's driving, everyone's dating, everyone's an adult. That second grader is going to have a very difficult time with that, no matter what the teacher does for them. So I understand psychedelics for those who are incredibly stuck or in despair and feel like they just need something to shift, put them in, give them a different perspective of that box of the mind. But it's still an experience. You may
yeah,
see a different dimension, you may see different entities, but you're coming back to reality, and that's an altered state. And you may start chasing that time and time and time again,
for
and
sure.
that's not what they're about. So when you talk about meditation, I've always been a big fan of it, and I've tried both. Um, but the permanent versus the altered is big key to me. Very big
Yeah,
key.
yeah. Something my meditation teacher says, Diane Musho Hamilton, she says a lot that emptiness is the only reliable port in the storm. And I feel like we're in a world right now, and some people are really happy that Trump was reelected. Some people feel it's the end of the world. There's a whole range of
And they
experiences.
and they felt that same way with Obama. So it's a
For
Republican
sure,
Democrat
with
no matter
Obama,
what.
I
It's
mean,
like
with I think,
it's
again,
crazy to me.
social media and all this stuff really heightens our experience
Yes.
of our fears and our worries. Um, but that there is, uh, our government isn't reliable, right? Not a knock on the U.S. government, but like any government, any structure, any group of people, right? Whether it's our family, whether it's our country, whether it's us, right? Whether it's our personal health, our perspectives, right? They're not reliable, right? That they're going to shift, they're going to disappoint us, they're going to fall apart. Um, and when they do, it's really important that that's not the center of our identity, right? That our identity is actually based on something that is reliable, which is impermanence, which is emptiness, which is the awareness that hasn't ever changed, that we can return to a place of being aware of everything that is arising at once. And I don't want it to sound esoteric, or I just want to like point to the fact that, like, we're in our mid 40s, and our hair is going gray and our bodies are getting older. And if we think back to when I was 15 going to a Rage concert, there was a fundamental awareness there that hasn't shifted, right?
Hmm.
Everything else has shifted since I was 15. And yet that ability to just be aware of my surroundings, of myself, that awareness hasn't shifted, and it is the only reliable port in the storm, right? We can always come back to that sense of awareness time and time again, and it's there and it's unchanging, and it's a real refuge. And so being able to come back to it again and again is for me the essence of meditation.
Well, two things to that. The When things crumble, it not being the center of the universe. And a great example is the tens of millions of males that every NFL season, when their team loses on Sunday, it crushes their week. So, and that's no matter what it is in our life, there's so many things that can bring us down. And secondly, that fundamental awareness that's always there. It's been there since you were born. It'll be there after you drop the body. A great teacher by Adi Shanti, when he first had his awakening, he was meditating in the backyard and he heard a bird. And he said it kind of came up from his gut. And the first thing that came to his mind was, who is it that hears that bird? Right? We were given these senses. But if you sit there and close your eyes and you hear that bird, the universe heard the bird just through our senses. There's that fundamental consciousness, that awareness that is always there behind our eyes, behind our senses, that is just sitting back. And he said, as soon as that question bubbled up and said, who hears that bird? He said a massive shift of consciousness happened for him. So that awareness is always there. So I love how you speak about that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a beautiful story. I love Adyashanti. He's
what a gentle soul. What an amazing human being. The thing I love about him is that people would come up to him and try to prove him wrong, or they'd ask him very, very poignant questions, and he would just so gently, so patiently talk them through it. Never defended anything he said, never tried to argue, just simply said, this is, slowly guide him through the process. And what an amazing soul. What an amazing soul. So now, actually, let's go to meditation. What are you doing currently? Are you taking groups up into nature? What's going on there with the meditation and the retreats and the classes and everything you're doing?
Yeah. So I'm a student of Soto Zen.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of different schools of Buddhism, from Theravada to Mahayana to Vajrayana, kind of, moving from India, Tibet, China, southern route into Vietnam and Burma. And so there's just fascinating history and movement and changes in Buddhism. And one of those routes, went from India to China and then to Japan, went, and, mixed with the different cultures and religions. And so Zen, while Zen is a popular term for everything from massage to chilling out and whatever else people use
every
Zen
alcohol
for.
commercial. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. It's also a religion. It's also a specific school of Buddhism, and in that school there are three main schools: the Rinzai school, the Soto school, and the Senbo Kyodai school. And the lineage I study in is through a teacher named Maizumi Roshi, and he was actually transmitted in all three of those lineages. And he came to the U.S. in the '60s, really kind of set up shop in the '60s in L.A., the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And one of his students was Dennis Merzel, Genpo Roshi.
Genpo Roshi of Utah. Mm-hmm.
Say it again?
Genpo Roshi of Utah?
Yeah. And so he had a spot here in Salt Lake City for quite a while, and I was very fortunate to find it in my early mid-20s. I think I was 23, maybe 24, and started studying with him. He had a number of scandals. His place fell apart, and
Mm-hmm.
studied with his one of his students, Diane Mushohan, um, and took a few twists and turns and did some different studying with some different teachers, but then really came back to Diane and her teachings, and we were talking about before how there's so many places to find insight, to find people's experiences of truth, to find folks who have really relevant and important experiences that they want to share. And for me, there's something really important about being a part of a transmitted lineage. Knowing that Maizumi Roshi, who became a monk at 11 years old and studied in these different traditions, and was actually given, you're given a ceremony and a piece of paper that says, like, you can now teach, right? Like, I have, like, as someone who's spent their life learning this, notice that you have actually experiences and insight and are capable of teaching this. And so there's that transmission of the lineage. And when folks receive Jukai, which is kind of the first entrance to Buddhism, they take a certain number of precepts around not doing harm with their sexuality, not engaging in intoxicants until they're able to be conscious. All the real kind of foundational stuff. So when you do that, another thing you do is you do a lineage chart, and you go from Buddha all the way to your teacher. And obviously, I think every religion is obsessed with tracing themselves back to the founder of the school. Yeah. But I think what I'm trying to get at is there's a real value in being able to be a part of a transmitted lineage and being able to study with a teacher who's really dedicated their life to the teachings of a school and tradition. So, I'm a student of the Soto Zen lineage and a student of Diane Shaw Hamilton. And, the teaching that I do, I teach at the prison, teach Buddhism at the prison, something I've done with my wife for about 10 years on and off. There was a break during COVID, and when we moved to prison. And, I work with my teacher as well, and we sometimes do meditation retreats in the woods. And so, teaching folks meditation in that natural surrounding, I feel like it's the easiest way to give people an experience of emptiness of themselves. Like, I feel like everybody has been able to, you climb a mountain and there's just this gorgeous vista, and you're automatically drawn and pulled into it, and it's no longer just yourself, it's now the whole world around you. So being in nature, I feel, creates a thing about experiencing these things. That's pretty cool. So I do some retreats with my teacher. I do work with the prison. But the thing about being part of a lineage where you have to be, given that seal of approval from the teacher is that, I'm not a meditation teacher. I'm a meditation student. I continue to be a student until, my teacher says you're ready to teach, and there's elaborate ceremonies that go with that process. And so, I really consider myself a meditation as a student.
Beautiful. When I was searching after leaving my business, before I found my teacher, I met with Genpo a couple times. I met with him up by his place in the canyons, and then I met with him for lunch at a place. And I remember I was so naive and ignorant to what I was asking, because I grew up in Utah, but I wasn't Mormon. I wasn't an atheist either. I had no background of anything, no Buddhism, no God, nothing. For some reason, I was talking to a lot of people, and they said, you're not looking for self-development. You're not looking for Tony Robbins. You're looking for more of a spiritual path. And I was like, okay. So I went searching. And I remember sitting with him at a restaurant, and I was talking about meditation. And And he's confident, but he's got kind of an arrogance about him in a sense. He's like, yeah, so what? What do you mean meditation? I'm meditating right now, bro. He didn't say bro, but his eyes were open. He's like, I can meditate with my eyes open. And he kind of sat back and looked at me like I just asked him the dumbest question on the planet. And I was like, shit. Check, please. But he was amazing. He gave me all the time I asked, all the questions I had. He ended up not being my guy, but I found a guy probably a couple months later, and I've spent the last decade with him. Amazing human being. But yeah, that's a unique path, because when you talk about it so confidently, as if it's a normal thing, and it's very abnormal, especially two guys in Utah, to find teachers that people would travel the world for, to spend that much time, to have that much access to them. I mean, I had unfeathered access to him. Any question, anytime I wanted to go sit with him. It wasn't like once a week or once a month on Zoom. It was sometimes 3-4 times a week. Any little thing, any doubt, I felt this, he was right there. And that's what they love.
That's been kind of the way for, since people have been these experiences, is they realize that there are schools, there are methods, and there are teachers who've been studying. And I'll also say that that's also like this valence towards lineage and tradition, not only because we're in this world of a million truths, and everyone has their experience, and everyone has the ability to kind of sell themselves as like, oh, I had this one experience and now I'm going to be a guru. There's also just this realization that there is tremendous boredom, and there's this real difficulty with working with yourself. And without a deep commitment to a lineage, to a practice, to a teacher, it's really easy to leave, right? To say like, oh, I don't like my teacher anymore. They said something to me that I don't agree with. Or
they hurt my ego. I'm going to go find someone else.
Yeah, I'm going to go find someone else, and then the moment they fall off their pedestal, I'm going to leave. And all these teachers are really, really human, and they, just because they have a depth of insight in emptiness or meditation or whatever it is, it doesn't mean that they have developed other aspects of the way they see the world or the way they interact with people. And there's something really disappointing about that. Growing up, watching Kung Fu TV series or whatever other kind of, example of like what this master looks like, who you need to like snatch a stone from their hand before you like become a master, and they call you grasshopper. But, it's all really fictitious. Like at the end of the day, they're not a blind master that knows everything. They're just a human being who's dedicated themselves to this path and have a lot of insight. And it's their job to help you see the parts of your ego that you don't want to see. And it's the job of the practice to keep putting you in a position where you have to meet yourself, and you have to meet the uncomfortable part of yourself. And that's really hard. And without a teacher who's really done that again and again, and without a commitment to doing that again and again with your teacher and in a practice, it's really hard to stick to. It's really hard to not just say like, oh, this is terribly uncomfortable. I'm gonna go do something that's much more, that tells me I'm actually amazing. Like I'm the shit, right? I'm gonna go do this awesome retreat that's just gonna build me up and tell me how great I am, and then I'm gonna go back to like, my life feeling that I am amazing, which is great. I think we do need healthy egos to be able to.
Yeah, sometimes we need that.
Yeah, but I think the fundamental part of a practice is being part of a teacher that can help us, studying with a teacher that can help us meet ourselves in the places that we don't want to see.
Yeah, I always said that I'm very happy that people have time and resources to go do a 10-day silent retreat. But the only day I care about is day 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all I care about is day 11. And there was quite a few people, me being me, like when I gain access to something I think is good, I will tell everyone about it. So I took a lot of people to my teacher, and very, very, very few stayed.
Yeah, for sure.
They'd stay for a couple meetings, couple days, couple weeks. As soon as he popped off and said something really true, they wouldn't say fuck off. They would just be like, oh yeah, interesting. And then they'd never see him again. And they'd go find someone at a much simpler level that, like you said, built them up. He tore me down time and time and time and time again in the gentlest, most kind way possible. Yeah. And my intention was always, as you put it, capital T truth. Because from a very young age, that's why truth has no sides. I was like, Republicans and Democrats, Catholic, atheists, any argument. A lawyer could get someone off for murder who committed murder. Like, hold on a sec here. Like, how are we this ignorant to believing that my way is the right way and the other side is wrong, and they're the ones ruining? No. So I wanted truth. I wanted that absolute, that emptiness, that thing that came before all of this duality that was birthed from consciousness, from the universe, from God, whatever you want to call it. I wanted access to that. And I thought that was common. It's very uncommon. And I can understand why now, because it was a very dark, dark, dark time to have everything stripped away.
Yeah. I think there's also the challenge of, once we have an experience of truth, like once we have a insight into like the fundamental nature of existence, right? I'll just use that as a bracket for capital T truth for a second. Once we have that experience, it's really hard not to reify it. It's really hard not to say, this is the only truth, and I'm going to preach it to you as if you don't know it and I know it. And then at that point, we're not even in the experience of truth anymore. We're just in the experience of our egos kind of taking it. And I think it's really hard, right? Because it's nice when we like find a nugget to hold on to it and to like lift it up and to try and show it to others. And there's something about a practice and a teacher that helps us say, like, awesome, like, glad you had that experience, let it go. There's a lot of Zen koans, and Zen koans are like just a way of teaching folks fundamental lessons and having them experience them. But like one of them is about washing your bowls, right? So like after you have a good meal, what do? You wash your bowl, right? Like after you have a real experience of reality, of truth, of enlightenment, what do? You just wash your bowl and keep going. And it's hard, and I feel like I feel like it's such an important part of the practice, and it's such a, like, people can call it to the stink of Zen, where like people have just this experience and they won't let it go, and it's all they talk about, and they're just trying to essentially sell it. And that's also just a part of all of our experiences and our egos. How do we work with that? It's really nice to have a teacher who's also had that experience that helps you work through it.
Chop wood, carry water.
Yeah. The simplest thing.
Yeah. He, time and time and time again, and luckily the universe understood my personality. It didn't give me experiences. Mine was always emptiness. Mine was always meditating for 3 hours as if it felt like a second. Never saw anything, never felt anything. Because he, even during that process, he'd say, don't chase.
Yeah.
Oh, I saw a red light before I transcended. So? And these other people would come and I'd sit there and listen. They would just talk about these amazing things they saw. And he would just politely say, beautiful day, isn't it? Because he was trying to get them to understand it doesn't matter. It's just another experience. Don't chase. And that was back to 20 minutes ago when you talk about psychedelics. I think sometimes they're a necessity for those who are in a desperate need for them. and they've done amazing things for a lot of people, but it leads to chasing.
For sure. And I think there's also, yeah, again, my teacher talks about like the waking up and growing up. And so, like, how do you wake up in the sense of like have these experiences of unit of consciousness, of emptiness, of no self, of just deep connection to the world around you, and how do you also grow up? Like, how do you pay attention to your patterns in relationship and improve those? Right? That's not about meditation, right? Meditation is about that waking up part. But the growing up part is really important for us who aren't living in a monastery. If we're, just living in a monastery and our whole life is just we're going to sit, we're going to, do our job at the monastery and that's all we're doing, then, yeah, just focus on the waking up part. That's what you're dedicated to. But if you're married, if you have kids, if you have a job, if you have any of those things, you're going to encounter the waking up part, the growing up part, the part where I just need to be able to notice my really bad habits around relationship and be able to work on them, be able to have emotional maturity, be able to work with conflict, be able to do all of these things that are really essential for us. And so that's where my work primarily is right now, is leadership development, organizational development. How do you work through conflict? How do you find a pathway towards seeing each other's perspectives and being able to move forward? How do you set goals as a team and actually work towards them and hold each other accountable? And they're mutually informative. You can't really change your behavior unless you recognize that you're fundamentally empty. You can change, but without that, focus on the waking up and growing up, I feel like we're not going to move forward as a society, which is what we need, because we're not all living in monasteries.
No, the house dweller versus the cave dweller. The house dweller has in a sense, a much more difficult time because, like Ram Dass said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family.
For sure. It's the holidays, right?
Well,
I'm sure a lot of us had some rude awakenings if we thought we were enlightened.
I mean, I talk about it all the time where I'll be having a great day, feeling good, feeling clear, and then the 13-year-old will be pissed off because I got chocolate ice cream instead of cookie dough.
Yeah.
And then I feel like shit. It's like, oh, such the growing up part. There's certain things that I'm still involved in this world. There's still things I want to accomplish. There's still things I want to do. And the growing up part has been the biggest, because if that's what you want, you've got to be a different man for that. Yeah. And every time I have had a major shift in my life, it's been incredibly difficult because it's so easy to fall back into that same comfortable pattern. And there's certain things I've had to do especially the last 6 months, where the growing up part has been the biggest thing for me, because intellectually, you and I can have this conversation for hours upon hours with anyone on this planet. Living it has been my biggest teacher. Just living that and growing up and the day-to-day stuff, being a man, providing for my family, making the tough decisions, being uncomfortable, shifting who I think I am, talking to people, and going after what I want. Because I think one of the biggest things is understanding who you are, because there are things in Zen and this teaching that has a lot of surrender in it and sit back and stop working so hard. But I've realized with me, that is part of it, but there's also a part of me that was brought here to spread, to talk to as many people as possible, to work on it. And there's still a part of me that is ambitious and pushes. And for the last decade, I tried to be like my teacher, where I was calm, collect, and more quiet. And that caused a depression and a darkness I can't even plan to describe. And I would never wish that upon anyone. As soon as my authentic self was re-released, and you can feel the passion in me, and when I get really involved, it's not calm. It's fuck this, fuck that. It's really out there, but that people feel the authenticity and the energy. And that has been a part of my process of allowing that to come back out, knowing that it's not wrong for me.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a big part of the process for me, because a lot of people take one teaching and think there's only one way, and they try to be something they're not. And I can tell you from direct experience, it really hurt me.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the vulnerability of what you're sharing because I feel like it's a struggle a lot of people go through, and particularly a lot of men go through.
Hmm.
And I think
Yes.
there's a time that we're living in where men don't really know how to incorporate that masculine driven energy.
No.
And they're not given a lot of role models around how to do it. And they're constantly being told that the way they're doing it is wrong. And obviously, the way a lot of men are doing it is wrong. You just have to look at, Puff Daddy or whatever else, example
Hmm.
of uh, really selfish and harmful uses of power, right? And there's a lot of those. And I don't think there's enough examples of positive uses of you know, positive uses of patriarchy. Right? So patriarchy has become a really negative term in our society, and I think male leadership needs to be understood for its positive aspects and its negative aspects, in the same way that we would want to understand matriarchy for
Hmm.
its positive leadership, negative aspects of leadership. And there's nothing inherently positive or negative about a man or a woman in power, but I do think that there's shadow aspects of masculinity and shadow aspects of femininity that can be really. And I don't think we can, throw out all masculine leadership and say like, oh, all patriarchy is bad. And I know that patriarchy is a stand-in for a lot of condescending paternalism, sexism. They've just become synonymous with women. And
Hmm.
I think one of the reasons that Trump was elected is there's a real reaction to the fact that there's a lot of men who feel like, oh, I don't know if there is a place for my leadership.
Mm.
And I think folks look at what is being, you know, told to them by a postmodern society, and if they feel like they don't have a place in it, that they don't want to join. They don't want to join this world where if you're whatever sort of race, religion, gender, ethnicity, if you aren't shown that you have a place in the narrative, why would you want to be a part of it?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate your vulnerability in saying like, hey, I love my teacher. He taught me a lot, and I had to find how to incorporate this aspect of myself because it is an authentic. And if I don't, you know, bring that forward, it would destroy me.
Hmm.
So
It almost did. It
the
almost did.
actual quote says. So I
Hmm.
appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate just the focus on, how do we bring our authentic selves forward, and that doesn't mean we don't say like, oh wow, there's opportunities for me to express how I'm feeling in a more generative way, instead of doing the same pattern, you know,
Yes.
telling people to fuck off and that their opinion
Hmm.
doesn't matter. Um,
Yep.
and I'm never going to be able to do that unless I'm honest with the fact that I do get upset and I do think your opinion is garbage, and I do need to find a way to express that. And
Hmm.
making believe that it's not there isn't helpful.
No, there's Andrew Tate, and then there's a Zen master, and unfortunately, in today's world of extremes and how much we're divided,
Yeah,
everyone's trying to pick a side, and that's where the trouble. It's a good mix.
yeah,
It's the middle way. It's the middle way Buddhism talks about, but that is a very difficult thing for humans who are known for this is right. So if this is right, that has to be wrong, and vice versa. They very hard to find that middle area. Just a difficult thing for them
yeah.
to find.
I hear what you're saying about the middle way. I also just think there's just adult development.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to go through periods of our life where there is a black and a white and there is us and them. And that's just a fundamental point of development in our lives. And, we move from that, tribal mentality into this place of of creating rules and structures, which we see in religions. And then we move out of that into kind of a more meritocracy, where we've got our government, we've got, education, whether it's a trade, whether it's a college, but where the values are really centered not on that religious hierarchy, but on our ability to achieve great rules and governance. And then we've moved into this postmodern era where we're recognizing our interiority, we're recognizing the truth of different perspectives. And I think we're really getting lost in that leading edge of development. And I think not only are we getting lost in that leading edge of development, but part of that leading edge of development is telling everyone who's still working through those other levels of development that they're wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you shouldn't pick a side, that you shouldn't be part of a religion, that you shouldn't kind of have this meritocracy, and constantly saying that, like, oh, if that's what you think, you're an idiot, you're a basket of deplorables, right? And the fact is that it's a really important part of our human development, is to be able to be clear about what we care about, be clear about what is right and wrong for us, and hopefully at some point be able to transcend and include those beliefs and say, like, oh yeah, I recognize that this is really important to you, this is really important to me, they're different, and they're both true from our perspectives. And I think it's a really hard, bright line of development to be able to take someone else's perspective. I've spent, since 2008 in politics, and if I were to say, if there was one test that I would want every politician to be able to pass to be able to run for office, it would just be the ability to explain what is the countervailing opinion, right? So if you're pro building a wall, or if you're pro open borders, or whatever your perspective is, I just want you to, without any shade, without any of your personal opinions, say why you think that other person believes that, and why you think that is, why they think it's a good policy position. And I think if you can just inhabit the other person's perspective, it doesn't mean you believe it. It doesn't mean that you think it has merit. You're just saying, like, oh, you want closed borders because you feel that, people who are coming across the border aren't going to actually be helpful for our society. Or you feel you want open borders because, you really believe that if we have less restrictions, that there'll be more opportunities, right? Whatever the policy position is, you just need to be able to inhabit someone else's perspective for long enough to understand. And I think if we could do that, we could have better conversations instead of these, I'm on this side, you're on that side, and we're not actually addressing any of the issue of the problems. I mean, how long have we been fighting over healthcare? And is anyone's healthcare actually any better right now? And no one's actually solving a problem. We're just
we've done this since the beginning of humanity. Yeah. Well, it's 11 o'clock. I know you got to go, so you remind me.
My call is not until 11:30, but I need to.
Okay.
So we got a little bit.
Okay. As I listen to you talk about this, that the other side is not wrong, I always say that it's like getting mad at an 8-year-old for being in second grade. And just because that 16-year-old's in 10th grade doesn't mean that 16-year-old's better than the 8th grade. They're just at different levels. They're just at different times of their life.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult because we always think when adults grow up that we become wiser. We become smarter. We become less divisive, but we actually grow. We reduce more and more and more and more and more. We become more conflicted, more divisive. Yeah. When we include levels of consciousness into this discussion, I was talking to a guy yesterday, and he was arguing with someone. I said, "You've got to understand that guy has maybe 100 million in the bank, 160 IQ, well educated, but basically consciously, he still believes in Santa Claus." His level of consciousness, his level of clarity of seeing the world the way he does, he's so defensive on what you're trying to tell him that he'll never see what you see. A Catholic will never see an atheist, and vice versa. So you talking about how a politician should be able to at least describe what the other side, why they think, that's beautiful, because that's very difficult for most people. And again, we always think adults we grow up and we become more. No, that individual can have everything you think the world needs to give you, but their level of consciousness can still be an elementary, and you'll see how divisive they are.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is how to talk about it without creating ranks of security, right? And it's really hard to do, right? Because we're, um, whatever the frame is of like including more perspectives or, you know, elementary to junior high or high school or college or however you want to like think about it, understanding that perspective of Santa Claus is is still really integral to my consciousness
Mm-hmm.
and understanding
Exactly. We
that,
don't. Yep.
yeah, that we need to not look down on that part of
No.
consciousness. We need to be really clear about where it is in us and
Yep.
be really accepting of it. And I
Yep.
feel like so much of the divide that happens, particularly if you grew up in Utah, is
Mm-hmm.
like anyone who ends up leaving, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the moment they leave it, they are so anti-religion,
Attacking
right?
everything. Exactly. They
Yeah,
become an
and
atheist. Yeah.
vice versa too, right? There's a lot of people who find religion later on in their lives, and there's this association with like, oh, I guess all the terrible things that I did before I found religion, it's really because I don't have
Mm-hmm.
religion, right? And folks are constantly just looking down on the stages. They're looking down on themselves, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
looking down at the stages in their life and saying like, oh, I was so stupid to have ever believed whatever it is I believe. And I think if we have any chance of moving forward, it starts with our own shadow work, right? It
Mm-hmm.
starts with us setting an example of I can find peace with that part of myself that I no longer believe is true or I no longer live by, but I respect how important it was for me at the time. And instead of pointing the finger at someone else and saying like, oh, you shouldn't believe that, that's really dumb, it starts with saying like, oh, what part of me still believes in, you know, Santa Claus, still believes in a sense of that someone is watching me to see if I'm being good or if I'm being bad. What is the value of that in my
Mm-hmm.
life?
Yep.
What used to be the value of that in my life? And then how do I talk about it in a way that actually has someone who still believes that to feel respected, to feel like I'm not looking down on that from some, you know, evolved adult development perspective. Um, and how do I not only talk about it in that way, but how do I embody that? So when I do talk about it, people are like, "Oh, I can tell you know, you care about that part of you care about that part of yourself." And I think that's the real challenge.
It is. It is very much because like you said, I'm not upset at myself that I believed in Santa Claus when I was 9 years old.
Yeah,
That's just part of my process.
for sure.
I think the challenge becomes like this guy I was talking about yesterday. He was having an argument with this guy, and that guy was just digging his heels in. And he finally understood what I was telling him about just the different levels of understanding. Again, it's not an intelligence thing. It's just a different. I'm 16, you're 14. I'm just further. And he understood it. And the tough thing for people in what you're saying is walking away. He walked away and said, and just allowed the guy to feel like he was right. And that was tough for him because we're human. We want to win arguments.
Sure.
We want to be right. And we had this discussion like you and I are having. He's like, oh, okay. But it was still difficult for him to allow that individual who was just tearing him apart to feel like he walked away and he was right.
Yeah,
Right. Like a great teacher said, when a pickpocket sees a saint, all he sees are his pockets.
sure. Yeah.
So yeah, that's a beautiful way of way you're discussing it. It's being aware of that and understanding that doesn't make it easier.
Um, I think. What do I think? Um, I feel like there's a real possibility sometimes to be able to meet each other and
Mhm.
disagree.
Okay.
And being able to hear each other's perspectives and understand that they might not meet, they might not have the same frame of reference, um, but that we can still meet each other in a space of respect, and just perspective sharing and reflection uh, is really powerful. And oftentimes you can just feel the shift in that. Like you can feel the energetic shift. And, I mean, yeah, as someone whose mom is from Egypt and whose family is Coptic Christians and had a lot of, we have a lot of opinions about what's happening in the Middle East right now, right? And they're complex, right? It's complex being an indigenous minority, an indigenous Christian minority in Egypt, and the relationship that has to the Arab and Islamic population in Egypt. It's complex in reference to everything that's happened there, and everything that Egypt has participated in. I'm not going to go down that road. My mom's also Armenian, right? And so her grandparents fled the genocide, and so there's just there's a lot of complexity and nuance when you start to get into the way your perspective on an issue is actually influenced by your family, by your culture, by your religion. And I engaging with a lot of people who have a really different perspective than me, have really different facts than me, on what's happening and why what's happening between Israel and Palestine. It's really hard, right? It's so easy to talk about this in the abstract, and in the moment, someone is telling you, and you're like, not only do I not believe that's right, but what you said is an insult to my ancestors, right? It gets really complicated. It gets really visceral, and I just want to be, I want to be truthful about the way I'm expressing. That you can have conversations across difference, because it's not easy, and I don't want it to sound like it is.
No, it's not.
That being said, I really do believe just a little bit of reflecting of another person's opinion, just a little bit of finding common ground in stories and values can be tremendously helpful.
Yes,
Something we do I teach deep canvassing, which is a way to connect across divisive issues in politics, and it's a really amazing method, and it's based on storytelling. So how do you understand what someone cares about? How do you identify a value that they care about? And then how do you tell a story about how that value formed in you, and what you're looking for, and what experiences that person had that helped them form values? So I was doing this in 2015 in rural Virginia, and we're knocking on people's doors. It's the state legislative races. They're in the off years over there, and I remember seeing a big NRA sticker on this guy's door. It's starting to get dark, and I knock on this guy's door. I'm training someone else who's with me, and I knock. I can hear him kind of rustling around. He comes to the door with a cowboy hat, right? So he must have gone and put on his hat. And this is rural Virginia, so there were a number of times where people would answer the door with a gun in their pocket, and so there's a reason to be a little worried, and there's a reason for the us and them, right? There's a reason that there's me and there's you. You might have a gun. I'm on your property, and so he opens the door. There's a screen door, and he has his hand on the screen door, as if we're gonna pull it open and charge it in his house, and he's also in that place of us and them, right? Who are these guys at the door? And so we start with our spiel about you're knocking on doors. Are you going to vote in this upcoming election? What are the important issues that you care about? First thing he says is the Second Amendment. And I say, okay, why is the Second Amendment important to you? And he starts to rattle off about they're going to take my guns away, and I need to be able to protect my family, and so I hear in there so it sounds like family is really important to you. And he says, yeah, of course family is important to me. And he starts talking about his grandfather and how his grandfather taught him to use a gun, and how that was the time that he spent with his grandfather that meant the most to him, because he learned responsibility, he learned how to listen, he learned about safety. And in that moment I say, like, oh, family is really important to me, and I start talking about my grandfather. And in that moment he's able to move from stranger on my door, us and them, to like, there's just this moment that we're both participating in. We're two people who love their grandfathers.
Mm-hmm.
And he popped open the screen door, he came out, and we were just like folks, sitting around, the imaginary campfire telling stories to him, right? And we didn't agree on gun rights. We won't agree on gun legislation, but we both agreed that it's really important to vote, and it's really important to listen to each other's stories, and that families really mean a lot to us. Our family means a lot to us, and his family means a lot to him. My family meant something to him after he heard about my story. And that's the beauty of the deep canvas method. But I also think it's what we need a lot more of. It's the ability to listen to each other, to pay attention to what we're saying, to share stories about who we are, and what's important to us, and to be able to listen to each other while we do that.
That can be a story for so many different things. That's perfect. That is just sums it up. Being able to, and that comes from you as an individual, which I assume that's kind of the teaching and the work you do, is to help people bridge that gap just by listening and then talking about something in the same experience, and then it starts to bring each other together, even if you're not going to agree. So that's beautiful. One last question that I ask all my guests: what is truth to you?
What is truth? I'd say this is true. This connection I feel with you, this like moment of sharing, listening, being attentive to what we're experiencing in this moment, feels really true to me. And this mutual recognition that there is the truth of awareness that we're both sitting in, right? That we can have a faith in awareness, faith in being able to connect not only with each other, but that there's something more here behind us. And whether you think of that as God, whether you think of that as awareness of this moment, that there is something here that's supporting us, that's holding us, that we can be.
I've said beautiful too many times in this podcast, but I love that. I love that last question. I love everyone's pause. And I love all the different answers, because that sums up truth has no sides, because it's just all encompassing. Igor, thank you. Dan, thank you for connecting us. Thank you for your time. That's it. That's it, man. I really appreciate it. I'll get this cleaned up and edited, and we'll get it out to the world. And good luck on your next call. And I hope you and I can cross paths in person one day, because that'd be great, man. I love your energy. I love how you go about everything. It's great.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed this, Charlie. Let me know. Let's grab a drink, coffee, whatever.
Okay. All right, man. Thanks.
Connect with you in person.
Thanks, Igor. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.